LoadForge provides load testing for modern web apps and APIs that's actually affordable. The platform can log in, maintain sessions, test any number of endpoints, and much more. Start with a browser recording or easily script your custom test in Python. Learn more at loadforge.com.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And actually, that maybe is a bit of a lie this week. For Cloud News of the Week, I am actually on the road. And so not in the massive studio. As the world kind of opens back up and we start traveling again, we knew this was bound to happen at some point. And certainly wish everyone the best out there and good luck as the world opens up a little bit. And hopefully everyone has some travel plans and is able to also take some time off and do some traveling with your families this year. With that, I'm going to jump right into Cloud News of the Week. Our first article is really interesting. Docker. If you followed this show for any amount of time, we rode the Docker waves back in the day. We went to Docker cons. We were media sponsors, and we kind of jokingly had the Docker drinking game anytime Docker was called out in another company's keynote. And then they kind of fell on hard times. The enterprise strategy, as we've kind of covered here many times in the past, the enterprise strategy just didn't really fit with the developer community. There was a good bit of clashes, and there was a divergence in the business. And they did a pretty big pivot a number of years ago, and it's looking like that pivot was pretty successful. About, 2, maybe 3 years ago now, back in 2019-ish, they sold off the enterprise business, and they just focused on what brought them to the table and what made them successful, and that is, of course, the developer experience and the developer-centric tools. And based off of that, they have jumped over 4x and now are at 50 million in ARR, annual recurring revenue, in just 2 years. And because of that, they went and got another funding round as well, 105 million Series C investment on a 2.1 billion valuation. And also have increased the number of employees as well. Again, as part of the sell-off a number of years ago, they slimmed the business back down and got everything kind of rebooted and moving in the right direction. So certainly look forward to what they have in store next. For our second article, Pensado. And if you're not familiar with them, they were kind of the Cisco spin-in, spin-out companies a number of times. This has happened over the years. But this time they did a DPU, data processing unit business, and we've covered DPUs on the show before, but AMD purchased Pensado's DPU business for $1.9 billion. And so nice acquisition for them. And it really puts AMD on the map when it comes to DPUs and puts them back on a more level playing field because they were definitely kind of falling behind Intel and some of the others when it comes to the DPU market and what is going on next with composable infrastructure in general. So congrats to the Pensado team and certainly wish them the best. And for our last article, we're going to actually give a shout out to the folks over at Loft Labs. Loft Labs put together 20 Kubernetes blogs, journals, and podcasts to follow in 2022. So if you are interested in that, fantastic resources, lots of links. And of course, they do list the Cloudcast in there as well as a good resource for Kubernetes in 2022. So we certainly thank them. And link to that if you want to follow along on all of the different resources and all the different locations. Their link to that is in the show notes. So with that, I'm going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. Coming up right after the break, we have William Collins, and we're going to be talking about multi-cloud networking. Supply chain attacks and other application exploits are growing faster than ever. Lack of machine identity is a huge reason. That's why Teleport created Machine ID. Machine ID delivers identity-based access and audit for infrastructure resources like servers and databases, CI/CD automation, and microservices. By consolidating identity-based access for engineers and the applications they write, Teleport closes the identity loophole that enables compromised infrastructure and code to be used in cyber attacks. Download Teleport at goteleport.com/cloudcast.
Today's show is sponsored by Spot by NetApp, providing a comprehensive suite of CloudOps tools that makes it easy to deliver continuously optimized and reliable infrastructure at the lowest possible cost. Imagine automating your infrastructure to proactively meet the needs of your applications. Imagine leveraging the latest in machine learning and automation to scale your infrastructure using the most efficient mix of instances and pricing models. Imagine running reliable applications, cutting cloud costs significantly, and making life easier for DevOps teams. From cloud cost management to infrastructure automation, Spot ensures you maximize your cloud investment. The end result is simply more cloud at less cost. Discover how the most innovative companies are automating, simplifying, and optimizing their cloud infrastructure with Spot by NetApp by going to spot.io/cloudcast to find more information, request a demo, or start a free trial today. That's spot.io/cloudcast. And we're back. And Aaron, it's springtime. It's you and I on the show. It's good to have both of us on again.
Yeah, and for the running joke on the podcast, you sound amazingly normal today, considering it's pollen season.
I know. I feel pretty good. Today. One of the things that we talked about a few weeks ago was kind of diving into multi-cloud networking, and we did that with Forrest Brazil. And multi-cloud has kind of become a reality for a lot of things. So I know you and I have both sort of lived in that world for a while.
Yeah, and it's funny to finally be talking about this in a more realistic context. I know we've done multi-cloud shows over the years, and we've had guests on, and it's always been this, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if kind of phase a lot of times of like, yes, we want to do this, and yes, but then when you really get down to the practicality of it all, it gets really hard really quick. But I think we're starting to get over that hump.
Yeah, and I think it was weird for, I don't say it was weird for a while. I think the industry for a while would sort of blur together. They would say hybrid cloud or multi-cloud as if they were sort of interchangeable. I think we've sort of realized that hybrid cloud didn't pan out to be what people necessarily thought it was, but multi-cloud very much is a reality because you're dealing with a lot of different environments. They may not necessarily have been done on purpose, but you're dealing with them. And so today we thought we would kind of dive into one of the most basic things you've got to do if you are working across multiple clouds, and that's interconnecting them, networking them together, making sure they're secure. So really excited to have William Collins, who is Principal Cloud Architect at Alkira, joining us today. William, great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Give us, before we kind of dive into sort of this space in terms of multi-cloud networking, give us a little bit of your background, because you've lived both in some pretty complex, what we would call customer environments, in sort of end user environments, and now you're on the other side of the world, kind of designing systems and environments for users of the system. Give us a little bit of your background.
Sure. So my background has actually been with large enterprise for most of my career. So focusing mainly on, in the early days, working on the VMware side. I really got into the engineering space when every big organization was all physical servers. And I came like right at that point to where, everything was, going virtual. So you have the CTO come out and say, hey, look, right now 100% of our servers are physical. By next year, we're going to have this percentage of them virtual. So that was when, my introduction into technology really. And then since kind of after that, I started focusing really heavy on network stuff, network design, network architecture, automation, really focused on automation from the beginning as well. I love There was nothing a bash script couldn't automate in the earlier days, and then going on to like Perl and then Python, and just then getting into the cool, Puppet, Chef, Ansible, and, I'm a huge Terraform fan now. But then, getting into cloud adoption, I've done multi-cloud several times, from an org on the enterprise side that was just 2 clouds to one that was 4. And I've really blood, sweat, and tears in the multi-cloud space over the last several years, from a really practical perspective. And now I wanted to say, not that working in the enterprise in those spaces was a comfort zone, but saying goodbye to the, big company comfort zone and jumping into the exciting startup life with Alkira has been awesome.
And William, let me ask this then, because I think your journey really mirrors a lot of listeners' journey. And as far as playing with the different technologies over the years and kind of working through all the different tools. But at the same time, every survey that comes out and probably mirrors customers you dealt with as well. Yes, we're using multi-cloud and interconnecting all of these services, whether it's something really simple or really complex. It's, as we mentioned, it's becoming more of a reality. But how do folks get started? Like, walk us through how this challenge is approached, first of all.
Okay, so yeah, the multi-cloud is very much a real reality now. And from a bird's eye view, you end up having two fundamentally different problems you have to solve. The first one is, okay, I have these data centers and, I could have, I've worked with a company that had over 2,500 applications in the data centers. So we want to embrace, I remember the first time I came into this big meeting with a VP, and I remember the first time I saw the words digital and transformation together on a PowerPoint, and I was like, what does this mean? And then next thing we know, it's like, okay, we're going to try to get everything to cloud. So the sort of the first phase, or the first problem that you're trying to solve here is, okay, how do I just connect to the cloud? But I have to do it reliably, which usually this is lessons learned. Usually you start off with like a single, or maybe a dev team, used your internal business to business process to stand up a VPN to like AWS or something. And then they just built a bunch of infrastructure. And then a year later, you're like, oh, this whole shadow cloud, shadow IT thing was happening. I didn't even know about it. Okay, now let's get our infrastructure teams involved and figure something out. So from those early days to, okay, now we need consistency. We need some sort of interconnection that's actually fast and reliable. Maybe we even need SLAs, and we need to do it privately because, in the early days, you don't exactly know what you're doing. And the cloud providers, their documentation is great. But if you look at like the Ciscos and the VMwares of the world and the progression of traditional infrastructure over time, they have like these validated designs and these best practices that you can sort of work through. But when you go to the cloud provider documentation, especially in the earlier days, it's like, okay, this is how you do this. This is how you do that. And it's excellent, but it doesn't put together the full picture for you. There's a lot of, I think there's a lot of lessons that, enterprise technologists have learned over the past 10 years that were, and learned the hard way, really. I learned quite a few the hard way. So you have that whole process of getting to the cloud, but then you have this problem, let's call it phase 2 begins, of shifting that question of networking to the cloud to networking inside the cloud and across clouds, because these are two very different things. And, with the goal, the more you go through this process, the more you realize that goal is having a consistent network across all the things you want to connect as much as possible, a consistent network policy, some semblance of a consistent network governance, and, some good visibility across not just a single cloud network, but multi-cloud networks, and then the connectivity back to your data center, because all your back-end reusable services and your data may exist for a long time in your data center, and you may have to talk back to it. There's a lot of different scenarios and use cases there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, as Aaron said, your journey, we hear it over and over again, right? It's, there's the day, it's like you said, there's the day when, whoever's leading the organization, could be the CIO, could be, VP of whatever, says, hey, they typically come back from an event or they read something and they go, yep, a year from now, back in the day you mentioned, back in the day it was, we're going to go from bare metal to virtualize. We've also all seen, these stories of, hey, we're going to be in the cloud in a year, in 2 years, right? So there's that moment where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know that space. This is all new. And then there's the second moment, which happens quite a bit, which is like you said, they start throwing around some buzzwords like digital transformation, and you're like, what does that mean? Is that going to be totally new processes? Is this just kind of like keeping up with the words they need to use to get budget done? And then, like you said, we run into these situations where phase one sort of feels very hodgepodge together. This group did this group did that, and then we're trying to kind of get it back to going, okay, there was some success in there. We want to highlight the success, but we got to do it in some way that can be repeatable, can be managed, can be audited, can be the performance can be kind of kept in the right direction. Walk us through. There's a lot of different options when we're dealing with networking. Like you said, it could be between clouds. It could be trying to create secure connections. Like help for people that don't live networking every day. Kind of walk us through some of the options that are out there. Like we hear buzzwords, we hear terms like VPN or SD-WAN, or we're using the Cloud Interconnect, like an Equinix or something like that. Like kind of walk us through like what do those things mean, and what why would you use one versus the other? Where do they make sense?
Great question. And man, that's a loaded question, but I'm going to take a stab at, providing a simple, kind of going through each one of these in sort of a simple maybe summary. I'll try not to be super long-winded here, but this is almost like the evolution, collectively speaking, of, okay, like first, VPNs have been that one solution you have in your back pocket. Yep. Always. And they have lots of use cases. They're great. Even for the longest time, like in the enterprise, and some of the first enterprises I worked with, it's, connecting sites back to data centers. Many companies would leverage MPLS for like a primary reliable, this is our good link. And then we have some sort of active standby setup where we have a DM VPN as a backup. And this is these are the days where enterprises, I guess, are largely bound by transport types and carriers. And a VPN can connect you to the cloud also, but self-hosting and managing a VPN between your infrastructure and cloud isn't probably the best way to go about it if you're really thinking like reliability, capacity, the simplicity, just troubleshooting, ease of management. So you have VPN, it's really it's been around for a long time. And then you have, SD-WAN, comes along and changes up the status quo. So SD-WAN, it's an overlay by definition. And since it's an overlay, it can leverage, any combination of transports underneath it, like broadband, MPLS, or LTE. Kind of makes you think about it as, okay, we're going to take that WAN that we had this hard-coded design of MPLS primary, DMVPN backup, and we're going to put this overlay on top of it and become transport agnostic with our design. So having this overlay fabric where your sites all speak the same protocol, like with an example, like Cisco SD-WAN, it would use OMP is like the overlay protocol, and you get the ability to do some actual traffic engineering, more so than you would with just a typical VPN. And you can also connect, to the cloud with your SD-WAN fabric, but it can be complicated because you have to have, deploy appliances in each cloud provider and account for high availability, across availability zones, figuring out DR is gigantic. So figuring out multi-region DR strategy. And again, all these cloud providers tend to do things a lot differently. So you have quite a bit of overhead with all these disparate designs across clouds, even though you're using sort of the same solution there. And then coming to the
Interconnects.
cloud disruption.
Yeah.
Cloud Interconnects take a stab at saying, okay, we have this SD-WAN thing. We also have our traditional data centers we need to connect, but cloud has sort of come over and flipped over the kitchen table on us. And we need to, private connectivity to the cloud. And, we need some SLAs to go along with it. And a little extra capacity wouldn't hurt. So let's set up some hardware in a co-location data center, which is geographically closer to the cloud provider data centers. And let's just connect this stuff under the same roof. Sounds like a good plan. Again, though, lots of physical hardware investment here required, which means, the hardware refresh life cycles, operational overhead, increased complexity, figuring out all the routing and all that stuff. And then where Alkira sort of takes this and extends this further is saying like, okay, like our solution is actually called Cloud Services Exchange. So it's built on the hyperscale public cloud infrastructure. So it's going to enable the performance and scale that you get with, the major public clouds. So you get a highly available and resilient network of these globally interconnected, like what we call cloud exchange points. So you can think of these as like virtual colos. So you get the best sort of all these solutions we just talked about, but you get them as a service and, with the ability to manage like the public cloud. So you can deploy it like the public cloud. You can use Terraform infrastructure as code. And it feels a lot more like public cloud deployment. It's kind of built in the era of public cloud.
And it's really designed to be super simple, right? I mean, like, so, you just walk through a ton of networking technologies, having sort of lived in the networking world, like there's a lot there. There's protocols, there's, all kinds of stuff you've got to figure out. Your guys' world is very much this idea of sort of like, draw me a picture and we'll figure it out for you. Like, having come from a network background, like, explain how that sort of changes the world, if you will, changes things.
Absolutely. So yeah, I worked in enterprise for so long, and there was a few times where I almost made a jump to a vendor, but I was so afraid to be tied to like a specific. I like to tinker. I really like to get into the nuts and bolts and prototype new things, even in my spare time. Drives my wife nuts because I have like a data center in my basement. But going through and seeing like what we put together on the enterprise side so many times, like, okay, it's the same old thing that we did in the data center in these colos. We have active standby. We have stacks of routers and switches. We have firewalls. Okay, we've got to do cross-cloud routing now. So we have these direct connects and express routes and interconnects doing layer 2 from each public cloud coming back into the colo. And then we have to set up our routing policy. We have to set up firewall rules. We have, these smart hands engagements to have people in these data centers do the layer 1. And you go through so much of this stuff, and it's a long time to set up a new cloud provider. It takes a while, months and months. So we, in one of the companies I worked for, we had a large, we basically had a VP that said, look, we're connecting to these clouds and we're doing it like we always did in the data center. Isn't the cloud supposed to be quicker? Like, aren't we like supposed to not be deploying as much hardware everywhere? Like, I feel like we're replicating our data centers everywhere, and it's expensive. So that was when, at that point I started looking at like, okay, there's, this was a few years ago, but there's got to be a way to do this that isn't appliance based or hardware based. How can we, and so I started doing research, and then I found Alkira and, started talking to them. And I remember the first time I saw them go through a demo, I was just like, there's no way that it works this way. It can't be, so we did a short engagement. We did the private preview with them and started testing and tinkering around with the technology, and completely blown away, and I liked it so much, and it solved so many problems, like more so than any other product I've ever, prototyped or integrated in the enterprise, that I ended up, I'm working with them now. So in thinking of how it simplifies things drastically, like if you think of, in AWS, you have a region, USC 2 or something, and you have availability zones. So when you think of like network resiliency, and you're, say you're doing your own approach with appliances in the cloud, or you're using, some of the other new products in the space as well, they're sort of appliance based. So you have to deploy like a gateway or another, as we like to say, boxes everywhere in each one of these availability zones per region. So if you're in like 4 or 5 regions, and each region has 2 or 3 availability zones, you end up with this proliferation of appliances or boxes everywhere. And then you have to manage the care and feeding for them. And then you have to do the design around them, or you're doing the design with physical gear and colos. It's just unbelievably time consuming. There's a ton of design work up front. And then when you go to the infrastructure as code side, you look at all this stuff and you're like, okay, where do I even begin? Like, I actually need 2 or 3 tools to work with all this stuff anyway. And, our cloud team's using Terraform, and they want to use Terraform for everything. So if you look at Alkira, all that resiliency and high availability is built in under the hood. So connecting a cloud network to the fabric, it's going to have all of that stuff already worked out underneath the hood. So you're just, if you want to use Terraform, you're provisioning what we call a cloud connector. You're pulling it into the fabric, and it's got all that high availability built in, and you're connected. So it abstracts a lot of the pain in the design and just a lot of the overhead away. So you're worrying more about, okay, I need to connect this cloud network to, these sites, or to this data center, or these other places with this, security policy and design that I've already defined inside the product. And I'm just going to apply it to it and go.
And William, I really like that concept earlier where we were talking about, because everyone knows, especially in big enterprises, there's always some big nasty networking diagram somewhere in the organization. And I like that idea of just give us the networking diagram and we'll kind of figure it out. So I'm going to ask you a trends question around all of this. 2 big trends I can think of when it comes to multi-cloud is something I'm seeing in customers I talk to is sometimes they go multi-cloud not because of choice, but just because of something as simple as M&A, right? They build up their platform and all of their services in a data center, and maybe they're using AWS as well, and then they acquire somebody and they're using Google Cloud for everything. And so now suddenly they have to go figure out how to make everything talk across clouds. That's one trend. The other trend is COVID and remote work and trying to do the difficulties in the networking from anywhere. And so do you see those trends, and do you see those trends being more permanent trend, or is that a temporary trend? Tell us a little bit more about how it comes in to the picture.
Sure. Let's start with that COVID point you made. And that's, 100% spot on. I think more than anything, it really accelerated what a majority of enterprises were already trying to do. So they had these ideas in their mind, and they, how things are, in the enterprise space, it's really hard to make changes sometimes, especially the bigger you are. And this isn't exclusive to enterprise. This is exclusive to any really large business, on the vendor side or otherwise. So with the future, offices are going to open back up, and they're going to remain open, but many will still work from home in the future. And maybe that new norm is for this to be a personal preference. Some are more productive in the office, but some excel at home. There's certain, I think that you may not have as many offices out there. You're probably going to consolidate real estate. I mean, I know a lot of businesses right now that are doing that. They don't have as many offices. They're actually cutting costs there, and working from home is a major, perk for a lot of the technical staff, but again, you still have stuff in the office. So yeah, COVID definitely accelerated that. But it's to, bring in the game changer, like having that consistent network across all aspects of your business, including cloud, of course, that's flexible and can change with you through the curveballs, like the pandemic, and being able to adjust to these curveballs quicker. This is I feel like it can't get much more fast paced, but with each year that passes, it gets more fast paced. And, the products of, 2022 and beyond, they have to be able to adapt at a fast pace with the business. And then thinking about the multi-cloud question, I've lived through your scenario that you outlined twice of company being in one cloud, acquiring a business that was in another cloud, and then, pat yourself on the back. You're multi-cloud now. Have fun. And then I think acquisition is probably in my mind right now, one of the bigger use cases, but there's other use cases as well. Another big one I see is companies that have like large lines of business with different product portfolios. You may have a line of business that's like they're not even a cost center, they're revenue generating, and they're putting out a new product and they want to use like Google Cloud for analytics purposes. Well, you have to, like your cloud center of excellence or your main IT function, you can say, no, you can't do that, but they might go out and do it anyway. So your best bet at enabling sound governance for the future is saying, okay, we've got this cloud center of excellence. We want to enable you. We're going to put together a multi-cloud strategy and, going at it, from that perspective, playing the longer game, if you will.
Yeah. I'm curious, you were talking about kind of your evolution, right? It was infrastructure, it was virtualization, it became automation, networking became part of it. In the Alkera case, obviously, you guys simplify things quite a bit to a point where maybe, do you start seeing DevOps teams or DevSecOps teams that maybe like aren't naturally called networking are able to use the tool, they're able to work it into other things they're doing there? Or is this, still, complicated enough that it's kind of mostly the domain of what would be called the network team or the infrastructure team? Do you start to see some overlap of the application teams or SRE or DevSecOps teams start to make this part of their domain, their toolbox?
That's a really good question. And it's funny you say that because I've started seeing that just probably within the past 3 or 4 years where you've had this consolidation of like the broader functions like network and security. They used to be two really separate towers that like really operated separately. And in some ways it was good because you had security that never wanted to allow access to anything. And then you have network that wants to be more open and wants things to be able to talk. So you had these opposing towers, but they would often come together and build something for the betterment of the customer or whoever it is that needs, the functionality. But I think as that happens more and more, like security and network, we're really tied at the hip now and are becoming like more consolidated. You're going to see that in other areas, like you said, kind of like a combined SRE function of sorts. And I think we do help with that process quite a bit. And, I've seen folks that have never heard the word like BGP or, like, wait, a packet is what? To, using our platform and being able to like knowing, okay, this is what the construct of a cloud connector and attaching it to this platform does. These are the options. And this is what I can do with infrastructure as code. And the cool thing is your technical contributors on the network and security side, they can build this scaffolding, if you will, within the platform. So then you can enable the developers to just add networks, and then policy is going to automatically be applied to those connectors. So they can build out their networking as they need it, but they have all the guardrails and everything in place in such an easy way that they can't mistakenly misconfigure something to really set things in disarray, which is really helpful because, nobody wants to hamper developer workflow. Like, you want to enable them to go faster, but just to go faster responsibly, which should be the goal.
Yeah, no, it's cool to see. It's cool to see that transition in reality.
Yep. Agreed. Hey, William, if everyone out there was interested and wanted to get started in this space, how would you recommend folks get started?
So it's funny because I've read like quite a few books, and books are helpful. Training is helpful. But we live in a world now where you can spin up sandbox environments on VMware Workstation. You get these free cloud, like you go to AWS and there's like a free tier. The best way to get started is just to start doing things, getting out there, testing tools out, using them, and then figuring out like using the organization you work for. If you work for, whatever size enterprise or whatever company, chances are they're trying to do something with cloud. Step up and show interest and say, hey, I want to be a part of this, and start experimenting, and then figure out like, okay, this is how my organization's set up. This is our applications. This is what is important to us. Maybe you're in a protected industry and, protected data is big. How can I, bring those skills to the table and figure out how to solve those problems of my company with this cloud computing technology. But yeah, just getting your hands in and doing things is, ultra important, because practice hands-on, you can't beat it.
Good stuff. William, this has been great. For folks that maybe want to do a quick, hey, the Alkira stuff sounds cool. I want to see if it's really as simple as he said it is. What's the easiest way to get started? What's a good place to engage with the platform, with the team, with you?
Absolutely. So alkira.com, of course. Go to our site, read up on the documentation, and anybody that wants to reach out to me, I love talking shop, just multi-cloud in general. So you can find me on Twitter at WCollins502 or LinkedIn, William-Collins. And I also blog about Alkira at wcollins.io. So I've written a lot about integration with Terraform, design, and just various things. So there's quite a bit of stuff on the internet, but yeah, reach out. We'd love to talk.
Good stuff. Yeah, we'll definitely we'll get all of that in the show notes. We'll get the link to the blog in the show notes. And thank you for educating us this morning. Like we said, it's always the multi-cloud in whatever form people end up eventually getting there becomes a reality for you. And like you said, there's typically different paths to the journey, but it's very good to see things get confirmed and also, to see the places that are pretty complicated start to get simpler and everything. So thanks so much for the time this morning. Thanks for sharing with us. Aaron, I think I'm going to wrap it up. Folks, thanks as always for listening. Thanks for being on the journey with us. We're moving into, past the 600s, as we mentioned a couple of weeks ago. And so thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks for telling a friend, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.